not been to Minnesota in probably 20 years.
Bring gas. Welcome to Flagrant Howls, a Minnesota Timberwolves lifestyle podcast.
All right, before we formally introduce our next guest, who's been on Flagrant Howls before, but now has an awesome book out that just hit the market this week, let's sink our teeth into maybe the best burger in the Twin Cities, Judd. Tell the audience about Parlor.
Parlor is not just the best burger, folks, but I'm telling you, the chicken sandwich. Don't sleep on the chicken sandwich. Outstanding. The craft cocktail menu is absolutely fantastic. I've been talking to you about the Parlor in the North Loop in St. Paul for quite some time now. But folks in the western suburbs, Excelsior in particular, there is a new Parlor location there, a supper club, and a regular Parlor bar as well. So you now have three spots to check out. Again, like Phil said, the best burger in town. That is Parlor. 100% sports dad approved. You will be satisfied by what you get at Parlor Bar.
I've specifically had the Parlor burger at the new one in Excelsior, and definitely 5 stars.
Go out there for a nice day on the lake, perhaps, now?
With your
Stop
boy
at
Finchy,
Parlor?
you and Finchy, cheers a couple.
We're the same age, man.
boys.
We're the same age with the exact same sensibilities of being curmudgeons.
So let's bring him in here. Our guest on Flagrant Howls today, excellent beat writer covering the Minnesota Timberwolves for the Star Tribune. And he's the author of a new biography that is available this week for purchase, Ant, The Incredible Journey of NBA Rising Star Anthony Edwards. It's the first in-depth look at Anthony Edwards, from his backstory, his mindset, the relationships that fueled his drive to greatness. We welcome our guy Chris Hine to Flagrant Howls. Chris,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
When did you start? Just real quick before we talk Anthony Edwards, and we'll speculate on the offseason here too. When did you start? What was the first part of starting the process of writing this book?
It was a little over a year ago. It was right before Game 7 of the Denver series that I took a meeting with my eventual publisher, HarperCollins, and my editor, Sean Desmond. And I got a call later that afternoon from my friend, my childhood friend, an agent, Joe Perry, who said, "You have a book deal," after that meeting. And so in one afternoon, it all came together. And it was kind of surreal that it happened like this. And then I moved to Atlanta in August for about 6 weeks. I got an Airbnb in Atlanta. I drove from Minneapolis to Atlanta and just drove around Atlanta, spent time there over the summer, my off season, talked to a whole bunch of people from Ant's upbringing, his teenage years, his old AU teammates, old football coaches, and kind of compiled the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is basically his time in the NBA with the Timberwolves. And so I came back to Minnesota, talked to a lot of people in September, was expecting a nice quiet training camp last year where nothing major was going to happen, so I could work on the book simultaneously while covering a nice, easy training camp. And then, of course, that didn't happen. And so it kind of threw my life for a loop there in October. But by the end of October, I had written 80,000 words, and what you see in front of you now is largely what was written between August and October of last year.
What's that like to essentially then, because the thought of doing a book has always intrigued me, and yet I have no desire. What's that like to essentially have two jobs? Because I've always, you're trying to, and I know that they're not playing games, but in the NBA and football, in lots of sports, an off season does not exist now. There's always the potential. So what's that like to try to juggle what essentially to me sounds like two full-time jobs, at least for a period of time when you're working on a book as well?
Yeah, that's, August is traditionally the quietest month on the NBA calendar, where you don't anticipate a lot of stuff happening, September being right there with it. So I always kind of knew that I would when I would otherwise be on vacation from my job at the Strib, that was what I was going to be doing. I was just not going to have a vacation this year. And I was going to be trying to accomplish this goal of really largely reporting most of the book at that point in time. And then when September rolled around in October, I wanted to be in a position where most of it was written, and most of it was by that point. This is what happens when you don't have a family, when you don't have a partner, you don't have anybody to answer to in your life, essentially, right? It's just you that you have to answer to. This is what you can, I guess, do with your spare time. Sometimes is you could just write. And so that's what I did for basically 3 months. And a big part of it too, in October, I took a trip to Phoenix and San Francisco. A lot of it ran in a story I did for the Strib before the season began, but to kind of clinch it with Ant's Olympic experience by talking to like Steph and Steve Kerr and Kevin Durant and Devin Booker to kind of close out the book was kind of a big boost for just my energy at that point in time. Because it's like, all right, I know how I want the book to end now. I have an ending. And so when I got those guys for interviews in like early October, it kind of put some added wind in my sails, even after I was like beaten down by covering the cat trade for a good 2 weeks there.
Yeah. So at the risk of sounding crass here, I think the audience knows the three of us, we are all part of the Dead Parents Club. We're all 0 for 6 or more on the show here. And so one of the themes that I'm curious about, just like the molding of Anthony Edwards, growing up in the Oakland City area of Atlanta, losing his mom and grandmother within a 1-year stretch when he was in like middle school. How, in your documentation and your process writing this book, how did those experiences up until the age of 15 or 13 or 14 or 15 sort of manifest in the player that we see today with Anthony Edwards?
The thing that came from people at that time, and I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. I can't speculate as to like what his mental state was or anything like that. All I could do is quote people from the time who told me this, and basically it's before that happened. He the work ethic wasn't always there for him in terms of football practices, basketball practices, whatnot. But the way he kind of dealt with everything and processed everything after they passed was he was just in the gym constantly, and he was working a lot with his guy Justin Holland, who you see at Wolves games sitting under the basket. That's been Ant's coach, manager, confidant for ever since Ant was about 14 years old. And so they were just in the gym a lot together, whether it was late at night, early in the morning, what have you. Like that's how he dealt with it, and he saw himself getting better, and that kind of fed on itself. He wanted to keep working, keep getting better, and that's why he had such a quick ascension up the recruiting rankings back when he was a prospect. Was every year he just grew by leaps and bounds. And by the time he was a sophomore in high school, he was essentially, on his way to being the number one prospect of that class. So that's basically it. That's how he dealt with it.
Chris, what was your, because it's not as if you hadn't been around Ant a lot before your work on the book started. What was your perception of him going into the book, into your reporting, and what's your perception now, having really dug into who he is as a person?
And not a lot changed. I kind of knew the major themes I wanted to hit in the book because I had done a similar story 3 years ago for the Star Tribune, where I went to Atlanta, talked to a lot of the same people that end up being quoted in the book, just more extensively. And so I always kind of knew what that was going to be about, how they were going to tell me Ant was as a person. The term old soul came up a lot in this book. I think that's what people don't realize about Ant, is he's a good reader of people and of situations and who may or may not have his best interests at heart. Who to let into his life, who not to let into his life. He's kept a very small circle of people. It's a lot of people that are still from, his adolescence or from his teenage years that are still a part of that circle. There's not a lot of people that have really entered his life in a major, major way since he made it to the NBA. And the other thing that I think I not really learned, but was just more reaffirmed, was the effect that he has on his teammates and the ultimate kind of positive, uplifting teammate that he is. That was true from every stage of his life. Played a big part in high school, big part at Georgia and obviously with the Wolves. And I think it plays into his leadership and what you're seeing out of him now in year 5, going into year 6 in the NBA. He's always had a natural leadership ability because of that positive attitude. Like, people want to follow you. People want to be your teammate. So with that comes, and being the best player, with that comes the credibility. When you have something to say it, and people will listen. And he's always been a little more reluctant to, I think, be the rah-rah kind of type of leader that you think of when you think of leadership. But that's starting to emerge a little more in year 4, year 5 with the team than it was earlier in his career when he was younger and maybe he deferred to some older guys on the team. So his leadership voice is beginning to unlock a little bit now that his NBA career is moving on.
The old soul sort of aspect of his personality is a super interesting way to characterize it. I mean, just kind of anecdotally from afar, the way he feels old school to me is that he doesn't seem too close with other peers and players in the NBA. Like, he loves Kevin Durant, and he seems to have gotten along really well with the guys, the USA basketball teammates. But it feels to me, and you tell me what you learned just talking to some of these guys, that he does keep a little bit of a competitive buffer. Like, you don't see him hanging out with a bunch of other NBA players on his Instagram account in the offseason. How would you characterize his relationship with his peers in the NBA?
I think that's a good way of putting it, actually. I think while he's friendly and it's not personal, I think the competitive part of him wants to be known as, frankly, the best player in the league. And I think especially with players around his age group, I think that's especially true. I think when you see the more, the legends of the game, the guys that are, in their mid to late 30s, Steph, KD, LeBron, the guys that he played in the Olympics with, there's more of a respect for what they've done in their careers and rings and all that, and what they've all accomplished, going, future Hall of Famers, all that. I think when he gets around people that are more his own age, and I have a thing in there about how he didn't really like Devin Booker before they got together on Team USA, and how he wanted to basically be known as a better 2 guard than Devin Booker going into his 4th season. That's very true, and that I think is emblematic of what you're talking about, which is I want to be better than this guy. I want to be known as being better than this guy. Now, him and Devin Booker actually ended up becoming friends during their Olympic time, and that's kind of fun to read how that evolved in the last chapter. But it started out as, I really don't like this guy, and I want to be known as better than him, and I want to beat him.
Chris, when you say Anthony Edwards is a very close-knit and tight-knit circle, who are maybe the teammates that he's had present or former that are maybe either near that circle, or the ones that he has really kind of allowed to be near, that tight-knit circle, if he really does, trust his guys from his youth? Is there a teammate that stands out to you that he was really close to, whether it's on this team or from a former team?
Yeah, he's always been very open with his teammates, very inclusive of his teammates. There's an anecdote in the book where he and his best friend Nick, they spend a lot of time at Kat's house. Like he had that relationship with Kat. He'll go over Rudy's house for dinner from time to time, and Rudy's chef makes these quote unquote fire potatoes that really enjoys.
Judd here for Rudy's Fire Potatoes. Firepotatoes.com.
That's right. We've got, and he's also had, like, and you guys know this, like these kind of veteran sort of whispers over his career, like whether it was Ricky Rubio, his rookie year, Pat Bev year 2, and now really Mike Conley for the last 3. There's always been kind of these older, and they've all been kind of point guards, these older mentors that have helped him just navigate life in the NBA, navigate criticism from the coaching staff, what have you. And so I think he's let a lot of teammates in over the years, and obviously Jaden and Nas being here from day one with those guys, he's close with them. And yeah, I think I would probably point to those, like Mike Conley, Nas, Jaden, and Kat when he was here. He has strong relationships with teammates up and down the board.
So to go back to Ant being an old soul as well, and just his personality, Chris, do your best to explain this one, because I find him to be a very interesting person, okay? So on the floor, a lot of times, like he can show maturity as far as how he leads, but then he'll take these ungodly, untimely texts. There's there's the propensity, which does not offend me in the least, but a lot of guys don't, to swear at his post game press conferences, which sometimes it's fun. He doesn't think about that though. But in your mind, where is Anthony Edwards at in like the maturity cycle? Because there's some things that I look at and be like, dude, you've got to clean that up. But then there's some things he does, and I'm like, that's really impressive for a guy who's still in human years, not basketball years, is only 23 years old.
That is, I think, essentially who Anthony Edwards is. There are some things that he does where you're like, this kid, how is this kid only 23 years old? Or how is this guy only 23? He seems like he's 43, like in terms of his wisdom and experience. And there are some things where you're like, oh, he's really showing his youth and immaturity here. That is kind of the duality, so to speak, of Anthony Edwards. There are just facets of his personality that you are like, yeah, there's no way he's only 23. And then you see him getting technicals or things like that. And it's like, yeah, he has these moments of outbursts where he's immature. And, as we saw in the season, like that potentially that hurt the team for a game when he got suspended and they ended up losing that game in Utah that he missed. So it's a constant kind of battle. I think a lot of times in Ant's career, it's to borrow a cliche, it's kind of the hot stove cliche. Like you tell the kid, don't put your hand on the stove, you're going to burn it. And he has to just put his hand on the stove and see for himself sometimes. And then he learns from that, no matter how much you tell him. I think there's a little bit of that in Ant, especially when it comes to the technical fouls, to late game situations, executing clutch offense. Oh no, taking a hero shot over two guys actually isn't the best option for us with 30 seconds left in a game. It's for you to get off the ball and create movement and looks for your teammates. So it is, he has to learn for himself sometimes, no matter how much you drill things with him, no matter how much you lecture him or tell him something, he needs to do something. He's got to find out for himself at the end of the day, I think.
By the way, just a reminder, if you haven't already purchased or if you're interested, the book is called Ant, The Incredible Journey of NBA Rising Star Anthony Edwards. Chris Hine, who's been covering him throughout his career at the Star Tribune. Go check it out. You can buy it. Is there a particular place where it benefits you most to buy it?
Yeah, I've been asked that a lot. Honestly, I tell people Amazon, just because it helps with the algorithm there, and if you can go and leave a 5-star review, which also helps for future sales. So honestly, feeding the big corporation like Amazon, I think eventually helps the success of the book. So I would say Amazon. Yeah.
So this next question,
support your local independent bookstores too, by the way. I want to say that as well.
Yes. So this next question it's a bridge between kind of the Anthony Edwards centric into maybe what the Wolves face this summer, but he's not even 24 and like 30,000 feet. Not many dudes the last 25 years his age have gone to, as like the leader of a team, have gone to the Western Conference or Eastern Conference final. Like LeBron didn't get to his second conference finals until he was 24. Now he went to the finals once at 22 and kind of dragged that team along. But from 30,000 feet, it feels like Ant is quote unquote on track or ahead of schedule, however you want to quantify that. So as you look at where he is with this franchise and then where this roster is, do you think, or I'll ask it this way. Do you think the Wolves are more likely to make a marginal tweak? Goodbye, Nikhil. Hello, Terrence Shannon Jr. Find another point guard or something. Or do you think we're looking at a third summer of a massive Tim Connolly trade as they try to figure out what to do with Anthony Edwards here as the center?
I've said this got a couple different places over the last couple of days, but I feel like there is another major move. This is not based on reporting or anything like that. This is just me observing this team over the last few years in the NBA as a whole. I feel like another major move is coming. I just can't tell you when that's going to happen. Is it
How about the eve of training camp?
Right, exactly. That's what I don't know is it going to happen a month from now when this free agency period happens? I don't know. Is it going to happen on the eve of training camp? Probably not, but you never know. Will it happen next trade deadline? I don't know, but I feel like that it just feels like another move. Like they will preach and practice continuity, I think, with this roster, because this roster has proven that you could have success. But I think if you're looking at it long term, looking at vaulting into championship contention, you need something else, some sort of other running mate for Ant. And I feel like they think that too, and that's why maybe you hear the rumblings about KD and that they wanted to go get him at the deadline. I just think this front office too is just very patient at the same time. Like, they will not make a big splash because it's the summer and because they feel like they have to. They will not make that move just because they feel like they have to. They will wait for the timing to be right, whether it's the cost of doing that deal, whether it's the right player coming available, what have you. I think they will work with this roster, tweak this roster as it is now, and wait for that moment to strike. And that's generally how I feel about this. It may not be now, it may be a year from now, but as you go through these various transaction cycles and who becomes available, who's not, what the landscape of the league looks like, you just kind of have to wait for your moment. And that's what we've seen with this front office, is they have waited for their moments. They trade for Rudy, but D'Lo was still on the team that first year. Then they traded him at the deadline. They waited for his value to go up and for the timing to be right on that. And then obviously they don't make the cat trade until the eve of training camp, because DiVincenzo was finally put on the table in that deal. And when that happened, they pulled the trigger. So more than anything, they wait for the right moment.
What does your gut tell you about Julius and Nas as far as the potential to opt back in, to opt out? If they do opt in, one could be traded. What's your prognostication on those two? Because that's obviously a big story.
I saw, Bobby Marks did a thing for ESPN where he, said he thought both of them were going to opt in. I see the case for Julius. Like, when you have 31 million on the table in a free agent market that is not, a fruitful one for a lot of money being thrown around, I think that makes sense to take your 31 million and punt your free agency one more year. With Nas, with the option only being 15, I tend to think, mostly because he told us at the end of the year press conference that he was planning on opting out and seeking a long-term deal. I think, the team values Nas very highly. And so I think, there could be a pathway there for them to work something out that benefits both the Wolves long-term, and Nas sees a pay bump over that 15 million a year. And I think they have some room under the second apron to accomplish that and still be a first apron team, not a second apron team. So my gut says that there's room for both of those guys to come back in various iterations, whether they opt in or opt out. I do think that tends to leave Nickeil as the odd man out when you just reconfigure the numbers, unless they're willing to go back into second apron territory for a second straight year, which carries with it a lot of penalties and risks. And I don't know that they're willing to necessarily do that. Tim Connolly has said, they're not opposed to doing it, but I think they need a really good reason, like getting another superstar in here to do that. I don't know if just running it back would qualify as going back into that territory again.
Last thing for you here, and it's more Anthony Edwards, like the player and the skill set related. If I said, because he's gone into the lab a couple different times in his career in the summer, and he comes back with like remember a couple years ago, he actually did work on his mid-range. He had that mid-range kind of bank shot, and he shot like 45% from the mid-range, and then it kind of went away for a year because he added the three-point shot. He became this historically great three-point shooter. If I were to say the number one thing, if he inexplicably trusted me to give him a list of things you should work on this offseason, I would say that mid-range game again. If you look at some of his peers right now, SGA, if you look at, Kevin Durant, like there's some 53% mid-range guys that are cooking in that paint area. And he's like a 34% guy last year. That I would put that number one on the what to work on in the lab. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I think he even dropped that hint late in the season when we were talking to him after one of the games, that I think he did reference having to recommit himself to the mid-range game in the offseason. So I don't think you're far off with that. the thing with him in the mid range is he's just not been, like you said, with some of these percentages, just not been a very good shooter from the mid range throughout his career. So it's like, why not just keep taking threes, or why not just get to the rim? Like those are your superpowers. Like why are you settling for a shot that you hit at a 38% rate, when you're just as good from 3-point range? So, it's,
how about a Sprewell floater? The little I'm not sure he was great at that either, but he took a lot of floaters.
We'll see. Listen, Ant, one of the things that he's done is he's tended to add something sort of unexpected to his game every summer that he comes back with, and he's doing it. Like you mentioned, the bank shots that one year when he was obsessed with banking in a couple shots per game. So I think the mid-range is a good bet, though, to just recommit himself to that, because I do think he sees the value in it. He's always talked about, I need to have a good mid-range game because I need to be able to pull up when guys are just packing the paint on me and driving me off the line. If they're going to give me mid-range shots, I have to be able to knock those down at a good clip. He knows that. So I think that's a good bet for what he may work on this offseason.
Yeah. Chris Hine. Awesome stuff, man.
Thank you, guys.
Go
Appreciate
buy his
you.
book either at the local bookshop if you find it there, or the big conglomerate Amazon. And the incredible journey of NBA rising star Anthony Edwards, and then people can read your stuff throughout Star Tribune and StarTribune.com too, covering the Wolves. This should be kind of a crazy, potentially 5 or 6 weeks for your A job too. So
yes,
we'll
it will be. Can't turn the phone off for sure. No vacations yet.
Judd knows that
Chris.
feeling as a former beat writer himself too. So. All right, Chris.
All right, thank you, guys.
We'll talk again sometime. For Judd, for Dex, I'm Phil. This is Flagrant Howls, a Timberwolves lifestyle podcast. See you guys.